Hey everybody, welcome back to Trey's Models. On this episode we're going to be building the Ju188 by Dragon Models in 1/48 scale. The basic out-of-the-box build except for the seat belts, which are the HGW 148014 set. The usual aircraft build, we start out in the interior. We got some RLM 66 going down. Came back with a wash of some AK Interactive. The RLM 66 is the Model Master enamel. I did fix some ejector pin marks on the bottom of the floor because the way the canopy wraps around all the way, you would be able to see that if you looked up in there. But the cockpit went together without a hitch. With the basic assembly of the office done, it was time to come back in and pick out all the little dials and highlight all the knobs. Did come back and make some throttle levers for the pilot side. The seat belts were CA'd in with some odorless CA so they wouldn't fog. And then after that got all set up, a little pastel wash and a dull coat was applied, and that was basically a wrap on the office. So nothing too complicated. Before I closed the fuse halves up, I used some evergreen styrene strips to add some stringer detail in the back section where you could look up in the tail hole and see the structure. And with the office done and fitted up, it was time to get that module attached to the fuselage. And this is where it gets kind of funky because they're using the same mold but putting a different front cockpit section on it, so they don't have to make a new mold for each version that they put out. And this is where I found a little bit of a fit issue. A little bit of green squadron putty, some sanding, and then a little bit more gray paint, and then a little bit more wet sanding, and I was able to completely eliminate that step there. Also along the seam lines, do have to come back and rescribe the panel lines. A little tricky here and there, but nothing you haven't done if you've built a few models. It's pretty straightforward. Moving on to the wings, and this is where it differs from the Ju88. The wingtips are a little bit more pointed. One thing that'll help is to not glue the wingtips together and then try to glue them on the wing. Glue the tips to its adjacent wing part, and that'll avoid a step. Also, I cut the alignment tab completely off to help avoid a misalignment. The tab seemed to push it out of alignment with it, so I just eliminated it completely and did a butt joint right up against the wing and then glued the wing halves together. Still going to require some filler, but you're going to avoid a big gnarly step if you do it this way. With the wingtips in place, it was time to glue the wing halves together. Held those down with some tape and some clamps. Moved on to the engine nacelles. There's a slight gap that needs to be dealt with here as well. Nothing but a little bit of squadron putty and some tape to keep the squadron putty from going into the details, so you don't have as much to clean up. That helps a little bit. Some water-based perfect plastic would probably work better in this application. I was just using what I had on hand. Landing gear legs go in. Tail gear is assembled. I did that a little out of step. The instructions that have you put that in all as one unit when the halves go together. I like putting it in later, so I just did it that way. The nacelle to the wing fit, not too hateful. There is another gap on the underside next to the gear legs that needs to be dealt with, and a couple of other fine lines that you will need to come back in. Even though you did the trick by gluing the wing tops and the wing bottom tips together before you glue the wing halves together, there's still a line there that needs to be filled, and you'll need to rescribe and re-rivet some detail in those areas too. With that out of the way, I went and cleaned everything up. Rescribed a lot of the panel lines before I went and joined the wings actually onto the fuselage. It was easier to work with the wings off the fuselage to do that particular part of it. The wing to fuselage fit is really not that bad. A little bit of filler along the bottom. There was a fairly good gap. Along the top, it was a lot cleaner of a fit. Tail feathers went on. A very slight application of filler to the stab, and the elevator and the aileron controls went on, no problems there. So the basic fit up of the wings and the tail feathers done. cleaned everything up there, came back, rescribed what panel lines I had to, touch some things up, and then we could start fitting the canopy next. Well, now it's time to fit up the canopy. Originally I had tried to use a aftermarket Squadron vacuum canopy, and I had issues with the test fit on it and tried to trim it. Didn't really like the way it came out, so I actually reverted back to the actual kit canopy, and that fits up just fine. There's a little bit of filler to come back in right at the trailing edge of the upper canopy to the fuselage mating area. There's a little bit of a step. The real one did have a little bit of a step there, but this was a little more pronounced than I like. So I went ahead and took care of that. Before I actually got the canopy completely ready to seat down and mask off, I had to do a little bit of pre-planning with where the canopy armament was going to come through. The big 20mm cannon up in the nose. I could have cut the barrel off, but I really didn't want to do that. I want to make sure it stayed straight and true through the build, so I decided to mask around that. Later on I broke it off and it became a non-issue anyway. The canopy masking was we're done with some kabuki tape. The twin canopy gun on the bottom gondola area, I did manage to get that in place and mask around that without breaking it. So a little bit of luck there. But canopy mask laid down really good. I burnished it down with the toothpick around the edges to keep from getting some creep under the tape. And I kept changing the number 11 X-Acto blade out a lot. Keep a nice fresh blade. It'll help you out a lot when you're trying to trim these canopy masks up. Onto the painting. The bottom was painted black with Tester's enamel. Then a shot of some gloss coat. Laid down the decals. Let that set up. Sprayed some dull coat over that. Then I completely masked the bottom off. And in preparation for the top color, I had a lot of gray left, so I just did a quick shoot of gray, make sure everything looked good. Used it kind of as a primer sealer coat. Then after that had set up really good and I was happy that there wasn't any flaws that were jumping out at me, freehanded some modeling. The base is a RLM 76 and the gray on the modeling is an RLM 75 and the green is an RLM 82, and all the modeling was done freehand. Then the paint down it's probably 25% paint, 75% thinner on the modeling. It really helps it come out of the gun without getting splatter or some dry spray or some blowouts. I always use a test mule before I actually spray on the model. I keep a plastic jug out in the shop and practice on that and make sure I've got my thinning ratios where I need them to be so I get a nice good flow without any issues. And do that before I actually try to shoot the model with it. After all that had cured up and settled in, I hit everything with a good coat of Tester's gloss coat. Did a decal session. After that was done, I sprayed that down with some dull coat to protect the decals. With that part of the painting session done, it was time to get into some panel line washing. I mixed up a basic wash with some artist oils, burnt umber and a little black, and some odorless mineral spirits, thinned it down, and just did a basic wash on the top with that. For the wash on the bottom, I used a light dirt sand color mixed with a little bit of gray and went real easy with that. Didn't want to get too over pronounced with that. Then all the fiddly bits went in, landing gear wheels, exhaust, used burnt iron with some AK rust effects on that for the exhaust, and that was a basic wrap on the build itself and the painting and the weathering. There was a light coat of pastel that was put down on the tires and along the bottom sides, and then that of course got a dull coat over the top of that to protect it as well. Up front on the canopy, after I got the masking off, the canvas that went around the front 20mm cannon was painted. Actually used canopy glue to fill that gap in a little bit, give that canopy glue a little time to set up, and you can actually shape it a little bit so it has kind of a canvas look to it. after you paint it, of course, after it dries. The Ju188 was basically available with two different engines. This one actually has the Jumo 213 V12s. The other version could have the BMW 801 engines installed in it. And these 188s were basically modified Ju88 airframes, obviously. The big difference being the shape of the canopy. The wingtips obviously were a little bit longer wingspan. So they were trying to make the 88 airframe stretch out and be a little bit more relevant as things went on. Modifications were being made to a lot of other airframes as well. This was just another effort to get a little something more out of what they already had. Came basically into the scene around 43. Don't know when the last flight of the 188 was. As far as I know, they continued on until the end of hostilities. There was, as far as I know, a plan to make a night fighter version of it. As far as I can tell from the sources that I've read, they did a basic mock-up or a proof of concept of it, but from the RLM records that I could find, there was never an actual dedicated night fighter version of the aircraft. Not to say that they weren't used at night, but there wasn't an actual dedicated night fighter. The kit itself, it's a typical Dragon kit. If you've built the previous Ju88s, they go together real similar. They're basically the same kit with a different modular front end on it. The wingtips obviously are different. But the fit on it's really not that bad. There's a few things here and there that you have to fill in, but it's quite an enjoyable build. I would highly recommend it to anybody. Canopy does need a little bit of tweak in there towards the back with a little bit of filler. But again, nothing that's not unmanageable. But all in all, a really enjoyable build. I had a good time with it. Thanks for watching. Please hit that like button and subscribe. And I hope y'all enjoyed the video. Y'all be good to each other, and we'll see you on the next one.